Welcome back, everyone, to Todd's podcast. Our guest today is Captain Nate Kahn, call sign Shaka. He is a captain with the NOAA Corps stationed here in Lakeland. This interview today is, I'm looking forward to it a lot. And the research, every time I've done research, I've changed the questions, I've changed my approach just as I learn more and more information. But Captain Kahn graduated from the Naval Academy in 2003 with a Bachelor's of Science degree in English.
That's correct. It's a BS in English for those who are as amused with that as I am.
I had a BS with a BA, Bachelor of Administration, so I get it, and it shaped my future in politics as well. You ended up flying P-3 Orion aircraft, and you were in the Navy for a number of years. In that aircraft, you qualified as an aircraft commander, mission commander, instructor pilot. And then 2015, your career took a little change, and I'll let you talk a little bit about that and how you got here. So let's start off. I like for people to get to know you a little bit. Tell us, what you were like, where you grew up, what you did, how your career path to getting to where you are today.
Sure. So like most stories, on a dark and stormy tropical night when my parents were stationed in Hawaii, I came into being. My father was a Navy guy. He actually flew P-3 Orions as a navigator, technical coordinator type. Until I was about 8 years old, he was on active duty in the Navy. So I was born in Hawaii. I got to live in Japan as a young kid, which was super cool. I don't have a lot of memories of it, but the ones I do are very strange. Like sliding down 40-foot ice sculptures at what I later learned was the Sapporo Brewery Festival. When I was that
as an 8-year-old.
Yeah, when I was that age, I had no idea that my parents went to a brewery festival. I thought it was just this cool snow slide. But anyway, that was pretty cool. And then when my dad retired, when I was 8, they moved back to where my mom is from, which is North Idaho, small town called Harrison and St. Mary's, and it's outside the bigger city that's close to us is Coeur d'Alene. Which is kind of a big tourist booming area these days.
My cousin and his wife owns some property out in Coeur d'Alene.
Yeah, it's beautiful. It's a beautiful place. Anybody who's listening, I didn't tell you it was beautiful. Please don't run in there and soak up all the land and all of those kinds of places. Now, it's one of the best kept secrets that's not a secret anymore.
Great.
And it's a really, really gorgeous place. But it was cool. I have a very interesting dynamic growing up because I got to be very cosmopolitan, moving around with my dad and his career when I was a young kid. And then when he retired, we moved to North Idaho. They bought 10 acres, built a house. He bought cows and pigs and chickens. And so I got to, I grew up as a teenager, bucking hay bales for $5 an hour with local ranchers and doing that kind of work. So I really got a really interesting blend of, this is how hard work works. While my mom was, she was a school teacher. My dad actually became a school teacher as well. So the importance of academics got hammered into me at the same time as the importance of work ethic and, real appreciation for where stuff comes from.
You're an only child?
No, I have a younger sister. Yeah, she's 3 years younger.
Okay. When you went, do you speak only English, or can you get through some Japanese? Or
no, I could tell you good afternoon and thank you in Japanese, mostly because of the later years as a Navy guy myself. I went back on deployments to Japan,
right?
And that's kind of where that stuff came from. But any of the stuff I learned as a kid, is totally gone.
Did you always want to be a military pilot? I know you went to the Naval Academy.
So, I think it's fair to say yes. There's a certain amount of, whether you call it destiny or fate or whatever it is, like the way I grew up, I was a Boy Scout as a kid, and my parents didn't put me into that. Like, I found that path and followed it. My scoutmaster is actually the one who told me about the Naval Academy when I threatened to go to West Point, and he was like, "Why would you go to West Point? Your dad's a Navy guy. That doesn't make any sense." Because I had no idea. Like, I just kind of stumbled into this based on interest. And I think I was always on that path, like the path to being a commissioned officer, leadership. And then how that turned into aviation was that as a teenager, I basically burned up our copy of Top Gun and could have sworn that was where I was going to go. The fun sidebar, I chose, when I was in flight school, I gave up the dream of flying jets After the first flight I did with a full face oxygen mask, I just decided that was really, really uncomfortable and not the way I wanted to spend my career. So I pivoted and went in a different direction.
So you were naval officer. 2015, you had an opportunity, you had a desire, or how did you then shift gears into NOAA?
So in 2012, I was in my last Navy assignment. I didn't know it would be my last Navy assignment at the time, but I was stationed in Hawaii at Special Projects Squadron 2, doing a lot of really great work. It was some of the most rewarding stuff I did with the Navy that I will never be able to talk about. And it was really, really cool. And we were living in Hawaii, and Hawaii has laws for gun registration. So like if you own guns, you have to have them registered with the city of Honolulu. And it turned out that one of my squadron mates in the Navy met a NOAA Corps officer in line to register their firearms. They just happened to be hanging out in the same place. And I discovered that NOAA was recruiting for P3 pilots because they needed experienced aviators to learn how to do the hurricane work. And I was at kind of a crossroads in my Navy career where it was time to either decide that I was going to quit flying, become an administrative guy, and like go all in on that path, or look for something else to do. Like that's just kind of where I was in the Navy,
right.
Up and out kind of career path. And I thought, I've still got a lot left to give, and this sounds like a really cool opportunity. And I wasn't ready to quit flying at that point in time. And so I thought, well, what the hell, right? Like the worst thing I could do is not try.
Right.
And so I filled out the application and kind of went through that process. And I was actually selected for department head for the Navy, which is kind of the next step in that career path, on the same day that NOAA offered me the job. So the timing it turned out to just work out perfectly on that front. And so as that happened, it was kind of an easy way to transition back to the mainland from being in Hawaii for a few years. And it kept me in the airplane that I love. When you look at a P3, it's really hard to understand why somebody loves that airplane. But those of us who have done it, it's a relationship that is just really kind of hard to describe.
So is it as big or bigger or smaller than the C-130?
So basically the same size. Two different missions, same size. The P3 is a little bit longer, and the C-130 is a little bit wider. The P3s have a low wing, the C-130s have a high wing. The C-130
because of the mission.
Yeah, the C-130s were designed to haul cargo originally, and now they do everything. And the P3s were designed to hunt submarines, so it was just a difference in design. But they actually have the same engines. Like the exact same engine is what drives, or four engines are what drive both airplanes.
So when you got to NOAA, it looks like you transferred to OMAO headquarters, Office of Marine and Aviation Operations. Is that kind of what you're running today? That's what you're in charge of today, that division of NOAA?
So NOAA is broken down into 6 line offices.
Okay.
The ones that people know most commonly with NOAA are the National Weather Service.
Correct.
The National Ocean Service, the National Marine Fisheries Service. There's a NESDIS, which is the National Environmental Satellite and Data. I'm sorry, I forget what the rest of those are. They're NESDIS, they do satellites.
Right.
Office of Atmospheric Research, and then there's us, the Office of Marine and Aviation Operations. And so while the other 5 line offices are planning projects and hold most of the scientists and do the work of manipulating data and interpreting data and identifying what we need to learn more about, I like to think of OMAO as the execution arm. Like right. Our job, and I'm in the aviation side of that business, but our job is to put a platform into a place so scientists can gather whatever they need to finish their experiments, gather their data, that kind of work.
And as I was doing the research and as I spoke to you in the pre-interview, I found it interesting that not everyone on the flight is part of your team. I mean, well, they're part of the team, but some are scientists, some are civilians. Tell us a little bit about the makeup of the folks that are on the flights.
So within NOAA, across the board, both aviation and marine operations, there's a commissioned NOAA officer corps, like where I sit. I'm a captain in the NOAA commissioned corps. It's actually one of the 8 uniformed services that nobody has any idea exists.
Right.
People assume that we're in the Navy, or we assume that we're something in the Coast Guard or something like that. But then we have no enlisted corps. Like most of the Marine Corps, Navy, Army, Air Force, those groups have officers and they have enlisted. We don't have any enlisted. So we've got a whole bunch of civilian and federal employees, contractors, university scientists, there are lots of folks with different backgrounds that do the mission work on our airplanes. So if you see a NOAA Corps officer, they are either a ship driver, like their job is to drive the ship and manage that, or they're a pilot.
Okay. I know what you do is so much bigger than just hurricane hunting, and that's kind of the marquee part of it, because that's what gets the advertising. What do y'all do when you're not flying hurricanes?
So the hurricane work is sexy, right? Like that gets media attention.
That's the football program.
That's the football program that funds everything else the university does. And some of that's true, some of it's not. But just from the aviation side of the house, because people usually walk up and ask us, like, "Are you guys like school teachers and you take the rest of the year?" Like, no, we're not.
Right.
And
that's not your summer job.
And my parents were teachers. I know that they didn't take their time off either.
Right.
But it's so when we're not flying hurricanes, hurricane season is June 1 through November 30. Our heavy aircraft are on the hook for that all during that time. When they're not doing that, they get farmed out to do other scientific research. I've personally flown on an ice pack survey in Greenland and above the Arctic Circle for NASA, supporting a project called Ice Bridge. We do atmospheric rivers. So just this last year, Ventura got whacked with that huge rainfall, that big wave, all that stuff. We had planes flying in that system before it came ashore. So we're gathering data on that front. And really, there's another project that we do in the P3s in the wintertime that is called Ocean Winds. That is actually, we use the airplane to calibrate a satellite. Because we can gather the same data from a lower altitude and kind of ground truth it better than just confirm that the satellite is operating the way it's supposed to.
But like you said earlier on, you're the platform that delivers the scientists to do their work.
Yep.
And if the mission is go to Greenland, go to California, go to these rivers, that's what you do. Are they all flown out of Lakeland? Or, I mean, obviously you didn't fly from here to Greenland. You stationed, in Stage Northern. But for the most part, everything's out of Lakeland.
So all of our aircraft are based out of Lakeland is kind of the best way to put it.
Okay.
Everybody that works for the Aircraft Operations Center, which is my command, I'm the commanding officer here in Lakeland.
Right.
That's all of NOAA's, all of OMAO's aircraft assets are based here. And we operate from a detachment mentality where literally on the smaller aircraft, we have typically a lieutenant as the aircraft commander, and then there's another junior officer who's their co-pilot. And I throw them the keys to that airplane. They take off with a credit card that buys fuel and their own travel cards to pay for logistics, and they go. And they operate anywhere from, we actually have one in St. Croix right now doing coastal mapping around those islands. We've got a couple planning debts to Alaska coming up in the next couple of months. So we're literally everywhere across North America. We've got operations running kind of around the year, depending on what the scientists are looking for.
Hurricanes, they come across from Africa, typically. At what point do y'all start flying your missions and say, okay, hey, we think you're 3 days out, we think you're 5 days out? At what point do they say, Shaka, here's your keys and your credit card.
Yeah.
It's your time to go to work?
So the cool part is that, the fair answer is it depends.
Right.
It depends on what the National Hurricane Center wants. It depends on whether or not the the Hurricane Research Division is involved in conducting research. It depends on what's available. Because we partner with the 53rd Weather Reconnaissance Squadron out of Biloxi. They do a lot of the hurricane work and tasking to support the Hurricane Center as well. So it depends on the situation, but we literally are evaluating a project right now to base out of, I think it's Cabo Verde, the Verde Islands that are on the African coast, so that we can start doing synoptic surveillance missions before the storm is a storm, so we can identify those systems to determine whether or not they're going to be a threat. As far as the P3s that are going into storms that already exist and kind of hunting for the centers and like identifying forecast, like the forecast, where's the track going to go, that kind of stuff. Again, it depends on the storm and the level of interest and whether or not the forecasters think it's going to be a threat. But if a forecaster thinks that it's going to be a threat to the U.S. or our partner nations in this part of the world, we will literally detach to as far south and east in the Caribbean as we can go, which is Barbados. Sometimes it's Aruba. Depends on the situation. And we will catch that storm 1,000 miles east of that island, do work in it, and track it all the way to landfall.
Todd's podcast is sponsored in part by SVN Saunders Ralston Dantzler Real Estate. Since 1996, the firm has offered unrivaled brokerage services throughout Florida, Georgia, and Alabama. With over 90 expert advisors throughout the region, our team has the knowledge and resources to help clients realize their most ambitious real estate investment goals. When you choose SVN, Saunders Ralston Dancer Real Estate, you have access to a diverse suite of commercial and land services, including forestry consulting, land management, auctions, property management, commercial leasing, and negotiating conservation easements. If you're seeking to invest in land or explore commercial real estate opportunities in the Southeast, contact us today at svnsaunders.com or call 877-518-5263 to connect with an advisor today. Once again, that's SVNSAUNDERS.com or by phone at 877-518-5263.
Obviously, the closer the storm gets, the length of the mission may or may not change if you've got to fly 1,000 miles versus, hey, it's making landfall. What's a typical mission like for your team?
So it's actually, the limitation is based more on trying to turn around the airplanes to do 24-hour surveillance.
And how many?
missions.
There's two planes?
Two P3s and the G4 is the one jet at this point in time. So the idea being that we typically limit our missions to no more than 9 hours. The plane could fly more than that, but we limit the mission to 9 hours because we want 2 hours of pre-flight time and 1 hour of post-flight. And if you want to do 2 missions a day, you can only get 2 of those in a 24-hour cycle.
Service the aircraft too.
Yep, and we have people on the ground that do basically we land, we give a pass down to the maintenance crew, and those guys go to work when we go home and go to bed. Right. And then when we show back up to fly, they go home and go to bed. But so it's a maximum of 9 hours in a mission. I personally made a stopping point for all of my missions, like at around the 4 hour in the storm clock. We would check in with the crew, be like, "How you guys doing? You guys okay?
It's gotta be
we got more to do." Every storm is different. You know, I've been in hurricanes where it was just mildly uncomfortable, and I've been in hurricanes where I was like, I don't want to do this anymore. Like, are we done yet? Can we go home? So it depends. Really, really bad storms, really unstable storms. Ironically, most people don't think this, but for us, new, young tropical storms that are just kind of getting going are actually worse for us than like a steady, stable Category 5 big hurricane. I talked to some of the pilots. This was before my time, but Hurricane Katrina was one of the most devastating natural disasters we've ever had.
Right.
And the pilots that flew into it toward the end of that storm cycle said it was calm in the air because the storm had stabilized. You know, so while on the ground the winds are super high and it's dumping a whole bunch of rain, up at altitude it was just a steady, really, really fast wind. And so when you're in an airplane in those conditions, the ride isn't terrible. But hurricane, it was Matthew, and I think it was in 16. We did a flight where literally it's the single worst pass I ever had in an airplane, and the eye of that storm wasn't even filled in. Like, it was what we call an open eye wall on the backside. So we came into the band of the eye wall on the entrance leg, and we got hit so hard that as we broke into the eye of the storm, the intercom system on the airplane went dead quiet for about 10 seconds. And quiet on one of those airplanes is never good. Like, that's never a good thing. We run our mouths the entire flight. Part of it, I think, is a human connection thing, and part of it is that we're actually trading information that's necessary. But it's but you could tell. Like, it was one of those moments where nobody really said anything, but we all just kind of looked at each other and thought. I was thinking, like, well, I don't want to do that again. And then as we came out of the clouds, the sky was clear. Like, it was clear. It was beautiful. But right behind us was the single worst pass I'd ever had.
Wow. And that was one of the things I'd ask you. Have you ever gotten back on the ground, looked at the co-pilot and your team and said, oh, crap, I just don't think I want to do this again? Or we're lucky to be on the ground?
So we work real hard to make sure that we're all trained incredibly well and everybody knows their part in the dance, right? They're part of the program. And so I've never come off of a flight and thought, nope, like, no, I think I'm good. Like, we're not going to do this anymore. I had passes like that one where I was like, ooh, okay, that was bad. Are we okay? And you kind of look around quietly, and you could see everybody else is kind of quietly looking around, like, you guys okay? Is that okay? And so we've had those things. We've also got some limitations on the airplane itself, that tell us when we hit a limit, specifically for things like load factor. So when you hit turbulence, the G load on the airplane changes. Like, some people don't think about that, but it's because it's not like a roller coaster where you go through it and it's a gradual load up of G force and then it drops off and you feel your stomach come up and down and those kind of things. In a storm, it feels like you're hitting something because the wind shifts so dynamically that it feels like we actually call it taking a hit. And if we exceed 3.5 Gs on the load meter for the aircraft, we're done. We come home and get the aircraft inspected and that kind of stuff, and that keeps us from really breaking it. So I've never had a flight where I came home and I was like, ooh, I think I'm done, guy. That Top Gun moment, because that's my movie, where, Cougar lost it, turned in his wings. Like, I've never seen that. I know a pilot who has. Like, I flew with a guy that came in, and the thing about flying in hurricanes is that you can't prepare somebody for what flying in a hurricane is. You just have to go do it.
Is it just some of the most violent turbulence you've ever been in? Because I struggle with airlines going through the little turbulence they do. I mean, I'm good on takeoff and landing, but when we start bouncing, I said there are no mistakes at 30,000 feet.
Yeah. And, if we were ever on a commercial flight together and we come through some turbulence and you hear somebody laughing, that'll be me, because I...
And you'll be laughing at me.
Well, I'll be laughing at whoever's sitting next to me that is just totally freaked out. It's just kind of one of those deals. I know from my own experience that there is in fact some very serious turbulence at altitude. So I'm also that guy who looks angry and irritated at the people who the seatbelt light's still on and they get up and they're wandering around. I'm like, man, we take one wrong bump and you're going to break your neck.
Yeah, like, he put it on for a reason.
Yeah, and the airline industry is incredibly conservative because of, liability reasons. Like, it makes sense. But I've also, some of the biggest turbulence bumps I've felt have been crossing the United States when you hit the jet stream in clear air.
Yeah.
And it's a wind shear thing that you can't really predict. So, yes, it's describing an entire flight. When somebody asks, like, we take riders, politicals, other science agencies, people from NOAA that we want to show, like the broadcast meteorologists, like, we take the news folks with us whenever we can because it helps us get the word out. They ask, how would you describe what we're going to do? And I was like, it's going to be, depending on the mission duration, it's going to be 8 hours of mild discomfort interspersed by 2 and 3 minute periods of sheer terror. Because that's about how long it takes to cross any of the rain bands, including the eye wall.
When the hurricane gets close and they send you out to go through the hurricane and through the eye and everything, how many times do you cross into the eye? Do you just zigzag back and forth, or do you go in the eye, come out the other side, and then fly home, or you just keep going all over with a random pattern? Maybe not random, but a pattern that y'all ascribe to, and so you can get better measurements for your scientists.
So, unfortunately, like some of my other answers, it depends, right? Depends on what we're doing for the day.
I get it.
But a typical reconnaissance pattern looks either like, it's called a figure 4 because it looks like a 4. You cross the eye. In and out is one crossing, so you cross it twice. The follow-on is what's called a butterfly. So if you just kept doing that and offset by angles so your first angle is 90 degrees, your second angle is 45, so you get a kind of an offset to it. If we're doing a reconnaissance mission where the purpose is to find the center of the storm and pull the data, it's typically anywhere from 3 to 6 total transects of the storm. But there's another project, like that Ocean Winds project I talked about. That guy likes to fly in hurricanes too. So when he gets on board and he gets time, because it's all about which science gets our time while we're in the storm, I've done personally 10 different passes on a flight with him because that's what he wants. He wants high wind, high rain, and that's the eye wall. And so kind of when you think about it, we count them as in and out as one pass.
Okay.
But really, that's twice. Like, I'm taking on the eye wall of the storm at least twice on every one of those passes. So it takes about an hour if you think about the scale. So we're flying at in the storm 210 knots is our target airspeed. So you're in the storm at 200 knots. The winds are blowing 200 knots sometimes, and so you've got an offset. So if a leg is 150 miles long, because you're going from one side of the storm to the other, from safe air to safe air, it takes us an hour to do one leg.
Right.
And so typically, it depends on what the mission looks like, but 4 to 6 is about a normal penetration count for a mission, depending on where the storm is.
I would think it would be an intense time for pilots and everyone on board. You all have a mission to do. You're all focused on doing that mission. But at some point, whether you get home and you have your dinner or you're trying to lay down and decompress from it, it's like, wow, that was a pretty exciting day today. We did good work in a stressful situation.
Yeah, 100%. And if Woodford Reserve is looking for a spokesperson, that's my brand of choice. So,
Woodford Preserves?
Yeah, Woodford Reserve. Yeah.
Okay. So other than that, how do you decompress at the end of a tough day?
So it's funny as we talk about it. A lot of people, the first question I get is like, "Aren't you scared? Like, or are you an adrenaline junkie? Like, are you guys just totally hyped up on what you do?" And the answer is surprising to a lot of people. Nobody that does this for a living is into adrenaline in this capacity. Like, storms are not exciting. They're hard. Like, it's not like riding a roller coaster. It's not going to Disney and hopping on Tron, and you're done.
Not like the movies.
Yeah, it's not.
It's real work.
It's hard. And so it's I tell folks it's not about that adrenaline piece, but when we get into it, it's hyper focus. So like any job where you're under hyper focus or high tension for a period of time, like it takes a toll on your body, and it's hard.
Right.
So we've got a great gym at our center. Like, we encourage folks to stay fit. Like, you wouldn't think that sitting in a chair holding on to the flight controls of an airplane is physically demanding, but it really is.
It's a 9-hour isometric.
Exactly. And the airplane, additionally, nobody thinks about this one, but the airplane vibrates at about 600 hertz. So if you can imagine sitting on something that was vibrating for any frequency for 9 hours, like, your body just isn't supposed to do that. And so it's physically demanding. So staying in shape, treating yourself well is part of what we do that's important. The other piece is that, I personally encourage mindfulness. Like, I'm exploring it in my own way, meditation, things like that. But we encourage people we're a work hard, play hard kind of organization.
Right.
And so when we're not at work, I encourage folks to get out and do whatever it is that makes them feel whole. Because it really is demanding when you're in that.
Well, it's got to give them the balance that they need in their life anyway, just to function, but just to deal with what y'all deal with on an intense basis. During a hurricane, you've got 2 planes, and one of them's named Kermit and Miss Piggy. Mm-hmm. How did they get their names? So
the story harkens back to way before my time, and one of the aircraft, it was 43 in this particular case, which is Miss Piggy. One of the maintenance guys made a comment about the plane just being trashed, like it just was a dump. Like, this is a dirty old pig. And the aircraft started to get called Miss Piggy, and at some point, I want to say it was back in like the 70s, because these airplanes were born in 74 and 75. Jim Henson caught wind of this, like the original Jim Henson. And he thought, oh, this is cool. And somebody reached out, and he drew nose art for both aircraft. And like they're painted on now, and we've actually got the original letter where he said, hey, these images are yours ad eternum. And we're in conversations actively with Disney right now to make sure that we can kind of continue that tradition. Good. And that with the new airplanes and stuff like that. The G4 is Gonzo. There's kind of a good-natured antagonism between our jet and our prop pilots. So I like to laugh that Kermit and Miss Piggy are the P3s, and then you got that crazy weirdo in the jet.
I understand. So you use the P3s to fly through the storms. Why are prop jets so much more? Is it because they're more sturdy rather than a jet? The fans of the jet, is it just because of the damage they take and the stress that goes through, and Gonzo flies above it and you guys fly through it? Is that why you use the heavier prop planes?
So there's 2 reasons, and they're fundamental to the aerodynamics of it and the thermodynamics of it. The turbo prop, you get a big prop blade spinning out in front of the engine, and the intakes are behind that prop, so that the water ingestion is what makes it through the prop and kind of around it. So there's a reduced amount of water intake into the intakes themselves. If you put a turbofan or a turbojet into that environment, because where we fly, it's literally like a fire hose hitting the windshield all the time. Like if you put a turbofan or a turbojet into that, it would put out the fire in your motors. Like that's what it comes down to. And I've seen So if our engines run at 1,000 degrees roughly, I've seen a 200-degree drop entering a rain band in the temperature of that engine, just based on the amount of water that's going around and by it. And the other reason for what we fly is the wing shape.
Right.
So straight wings are inherently more stable. They're slower, but they're more stable. When you get into the swept wing designs for airlines like our Gulfstream, it basically creates another challenge to control forces, so that as the winds shift, you can get very unplanned and unpredictable reactions as airflow over the wings change. So it's about both engines and then like the lift vectors on the wings.
Any interesting stuff happen when you're in the air? I mean, it's not like a tornado where all of a sudden you see stuff being lifted up. You're pretty much rain and that type, and wind, I'm assuming, is what you fly through and deal with. Any interesting stories that have come about other than just going to a couple of those storms that were pretty tough?
So probably the craziest ones involve wildlife. And the first time I saw a bird in a hurricane was in Harvey, Hurricane Harvey,
right.
Flying up in the Gulf. And I'm personally responsible for at least 3 confirmed bird kills in hurricanes. And I have no idea what those birds are doing. I'm not really sure how they got there, but they
probably don't know how they got there either.
Somehow they find their way through the eye wall, or the eye wall forms around them, and then they're stuck. And I've seen quite a few, way more birds than you would think, inside a hurricane.
And it may be that they just were caught in the middle of the eye wall when it came over and they can't get out.
Yeah, yeah.
Hey, this is Gene Conrad, President and CEO for the Aerospace Center for Excellence and Sonofund, and I am on Todd's podcast. Please join us. I think you'll learn a lot about me and also a little bit about Todd as well, and it was a great experience. And, come out and visit us at Sonofund this year.
So I was talking to some buddies of mine, and this is a question from Beef Haddad, who was one of the authors of the book, and just kind of what are the differences between your aircraft and the Air Force Reserve C-130 Hurricane Hunters at the 403rd Wing Keeler Air Force Base in regard to penetrating storms? That's a very inside baseball question from someone who's flown the C-130, so I don't fully understand it, but apparently there's a little bit of a difference.
So fundamentally, they're 2 different airplanes. But at the end of the day, the difference is more in the instrumentation we carry. Okay. The P3 and the C-130, we're actually planning to replace our P3s with C-130s. So it's not about the airplane itself.
I saw that you're rotating them out of service in 2025. I was going to ask.
2030 is when the P3s will come offline.
Okay.
Yeah. But the difference is in the instrumentation we can put on those planes. Because we don't work for DoD, because we work for Department of Commerce, and we are outside of the structures of like U.S. Air Force test and evaluation, instrumentation requirements, kind of the way they design stuff they put on the airplanes. We have our own test bed. We have internal engineers. So if a scientist shows up at our facility and says, "Hey, I've got this new fancy left-handed smoke shifter that measures gamma radiation from the 1.21 gigawatt machine," we can figure out how to put that on the airplane and take it into a storm in a matter of weeks, maybe months, depending on how much the aircraft has to be modified for it. But we can do that cradle to grave very, very fast relative to some of the other machines in the world. And so that allows us to collect a lot more data, a lot more experimental data. It allows us to do more in flight. Admiral Hahn, my boss's boss, describes us as we're literally a flying laboratory. Like, scientists want cool, weird stuff to go up into a hurricane and measure something new. They come to us with it because we can fast track that process and put it in there. So historically, we did a lot of experimental research work in storms while the Air Force Squadron was doing a lot of the primary reconnaissance to go mark the center of the storm and help track it. What's happening is some of those really cool whiz-bang ideas that the scientists had, the National Hurricane Center really likes. And so what we're starting to see is that they want the data that only we can provide, because that gear can only go on our airplanes. They want that in every forecast and every model. So there's a kind of a shift happening with priorities and who goes where. But that's the fundamental difference, is that our airplane is much more robust from a scientific perspective because it can be.
It seems like every year we not me, but we get better at predicting paths of hurricane strengths. Is that just basically due to improved technology? The scientists know a little bit more about the storms and the storm systems and how they need, what information they need you to help them collect?
So it's a little self-serving, but I think the Hurricane Forecast Improvement Plan, the HFIP, that the National Hurricane Center is responsible for, I think the last time I got an update, the number has been like a 25% improvement in forecast track accuracy in the last 5 years. The best example of that was Laura a few years ago that we predicted it made landfall in Louisiana. And the first forecast after we put an airplane into it, that forecast update identified the point of landfall within less than a mile where the eye made landfall of that storm. We've definitely gotten better at the track forecasting. In a conference I was at just recently, I think that what they shared with us was that our 3-day forecast is now where the 1-day forecast used to be. Our 5-day forecast
they've gotten very accurate.
Yeah, is where the 3-day forecast used to be. And so they've turned their attention for what data we're gathering a little bit now and trying to improve the intensity forecasting, which is a tougher nut to crack because you've got to really get into the storm and figure out what's doing it. But we've gotten a whole lot better at the track forecast in the last 10 years for sure.
Has anyone ever calculated the economic value of tracking these hurricanes? And I mean, I know when I was county commissioner, we can talk about that at a time, but you do pay attention. Hey, is this thing going to turn? Is it going to hit us? And what does that make us do as local government versus state government versus federal government? Has anyone ever tracked that? Hey, if it comes through here, it's going to really be expensive. If it comes through here, not quite as expensive.
So we've looked at the value proposition from a couple of different angles. And the easiest one for us to identify is if you think about the cost of evacuating Miami, it's $1 billion problem, right?
Easily.
Just the evacuation. I'm not even talking about restoration, repairs, any of that stuff. Just the evacuation is $1 billion question.
Wow.
Our forecasts are accurate enough now that the emergency managers we feed that data to make the decisions based on what we give them. And so Dorian a few years ago was a great example. It looked like, early forecasts, it looked like it was going to whack all of South Florida, and it hooked up and played in the Bahamas. And if we had chosen to evacuate like that single forecast track, like maybe we spent a couple $100,000 in fuel and whatever the entire logistics for that tracking and forecast evolution was, saved $1 billion
right
in evacuation fees alone. So from a value perspective, unfortunately it's like trying to prove a negative, right? Because if we didn't have to spend the money, did we really save it? But the truth is, our forecasts are invaluable in that regard alone.
I know why I asked you about the 2 planes with Kermit and Miss Piggy. Sorry, my ADHD kicked in and I lost track. But you've got 2 planes, you fly 2 missions a day. Does that mean one of y'all's in the hurricanes every 6 hours with continually feeding that information to the hurricane centers and weather forecasters and everything? Because I know as county commissioner, again, we got updates, seemed like every 3 or 4 hours, from you guys, not just you guys, but your whole team that provides that. And that was how they kind of made their, hey, it's starting to turn north a little bit, or hey, I think it's going to miss us. It's going to go out in the Gulf, and I'm sorry, Louisiana, Texas, but good for Florida or whatever.
Yeah, so the forecast cycle starts with models every 12 hours, I think, and that as the storm approaches landfall, the forecasters crank up that periodicity. I think it goes from 12 to 6 to 3, depending on where the storm is and what the threat looks like. And we time our flights, our missions, so that the data we gather gets entered into those model runs before they go. So it makes for a weird schedule. Like we're taking off usually on the 2s. We'll take off at 2 o'clock in the afternoon, or we'll take off at 2 o'clock in the morning. In order to make those happen. And if it's not us, the Air Force is doing the same kind of thing. So it's pretty routine for us to have more than one airplane in a storm at any given time.
So they can't just rely on satellites. They have to have your team, your men and women flying into these storms with the probes to give them what? Intensity, direction, accurate data, and other than just a satellite photo and saying, hey, it's tracking here, but you're the ones that actually predict.
So
or help predict.
So we don't do any of the predictions. Like
Right.
we're the data collection folks.
Right, you're the platform.
But what we do is everything for storm tracking is based on marking the center of that storm. That's the point in which the hurricane where the winds are zero.
Right.
And if a hurricane has an eye that is 25 miles across, that center might not be smack in the middle of that eye. It might be tucked right up against one of the eye walls. And if you base a forecast on a date, on a center point that you pulled from a satellite and you just stuck it right in the middle, if that forecast is 25 miles off it on one run, and then you run it again and again and again, it's a compounding problem. And a great example of this, actually, so in the Pacific, where we don't have enough resources to cover the entire globe, right?
Right.
But in the Pacific, the Joint Typhoon Warning Center that works out of Honolulu for the DoD and for our interests in the Pacific and Indochina area, they were working on tracking, I think it was Super Typhoon Marwan, I think was the name last year, and it really messed up Guam, like a lot of damage on Guam. They only have satellite imagery to track from. Like that's all they've got. And I went out and visited them earlier this year and looked at their imagery, and I said, if we had flown on the day that you got this picture, we would have given you the center of that storm. And that would have given Guam at least 3 days more warning to prepare for this thing to come hit them.
Wow.
And it really, like, yes, you can track with just satellite information, but it's not as accurate, and it's really, really hard to give good data. And that's why they need us here so badly.
And to have 3 days accurate information to know what route it's going, the 3 days to actually prepare that island or this community or this coast is just it's invaluable. It saves lives, it saves property, and it saves so many things. So when you're in a hurricane, you drop the devices, or your scientists in the back drop the devices, and they go down.
Yeah, it's called a drop wind sonde.
Okay.
I don't know why, but that's what it's called.
Apparently a marketing person came up with that and not a military person.
I was actually thinking it was probably a scientist who had no idea that you and I would be talking about this at some point in time.
How many do you typically drop during a storm? Do you drop 100? Do you drop just 5? What's a typical...
So, like always, my answer starts with it depends. But a typical, like, anywhere from, it could be as few as 10 or 12, and it might be as many as 30 or 40.
Okay.
How long we're in the storm, how many passes, what research we're doing. At the very least, we will drop anywhere from 3 to 5 in a single pass.
Okay.
Because you want at least one out at the center point of the storm. And then you typically want one at the point of high winds, which is right in the eye wall, and then the same on the other side. And then they may want outer rain bands, to kind of to paint a picture of the entire storm area.
How much do they weigh?
Drop sonde, less than that water bottle.
Oh, okay. So it's not, you're not dropping a 50-pound
no
thing's going to be whipping around at 200 miles an hour.
No, they're actually, we just transitioned to what they're calling the mini sonde, because they redesigned it, and it's actually almost, if you stacked these two water bottles together, that's about the size of this device. It's a cardboard tube, like a paper towel roll, with the circuitry and stuff on the inside of it. And a lot of people ask us, like, well, what do you guys do with that stuff afterwards? I'm not going back for it.
Right.
So it's designed to break down, and the metal components in the circuits and stuff are designed to break down into the ocean and minimize any pollution to the maximum extent possible.
Well, that was my next question: is is there someone on the ground, or is there someone out there that's got a homing device and you go pick it up because they're $1 million a piece?
No, these are a couple $100,
Okay.
and don't quote me on that if you wanted to buy a bunch of them. But they're like any uncrewed system. They are designed to not be recovered.
Okay.
So when they go, and they've got a transmitter. Basically, the way we kick them out of the airplane, and they collect data all the way to the water point, and then at the point that they hit the water, they stop transmitting data, and that's what we're looking for.
What's some advice that you would give, folks that are looking for maybe a career at NOAA, whether it's pilots, whether it's mechanics, whether it's whatever you guys do? What advice would you get someone that kind of turns you into doing that versus, hey, I was ready to make a transition out of the Navy, or trying to figure out what my next phase would be?
So the first advice I'd give to anybody for any career, anything on that front is do your absolute best at whatever you're doing right now. Because even if you want to be the president someday, you got to walk the path, right? And if you aren't producing, my Navy leadership would call it sustained superior performance. Like if you're not the best person for the job you're doing right now, why do I want to give you another job? like if somebody else is the best. So always be the best you can be at what you're currently doing, because you never know when you're going to need that recommendation. And then the second is be open to opportunities. Ask questions. Like, don't be afraid to walk up to me at an airport or me at an air show or something like that and be like, hey, do you know anybody who can like point me in a direction? And then kind of the third piece of advice would just be study hard. Like, I have an English degree and I fly airplanes. That's kind of a weird thing in and of itself, right? Military school, it puts me on a path for that. But I had to do the work. Like, I had to do the hard work to get there, and then be open to when somebody hears a conversation and says, hey, they're taking applications. Well, a couple of quick Googles later, and I was on a path.
Right. And you've got to position yourself for success. Like you said, you've got to put yourself family-wise, you've got to put yourself career-wise. I think I read are all of the officers at NOAA 4-year degrees? Is that what's required to work for you guys?
Every commissioned officer in the military is required to have a bachelor's degree. They're in the uniform services. That's a standard across the board. We actually have some more restrictive requirements that say that your bachelor's degree needs to include, I think it's a total of 48 credits in STEM.
Right.
So conveniently, like, well, how do you have an English degree? How do you have STEM credits? I went to the Naval Academy, and the core curriculum there made me take chemistry and calculus and physics and all of this other really brutal classwork.
Right.
But that is something that sets us apart as a science-based agency, is that we have to have specific amounts of STEM credits.
But you're not a scientist by trade.
No, and none of our officers are.
Right, but you've got to have some understanding of what the men and women in the back of the plane are doing and how they can explain it to you and say, this is what we need for the mission. Have you gotten exponentially smarter about science since you've been part of this organization?
I wouldn't say that
by absorption, if nothing else.
Yeah, I wouldn't say that I've gotten exponentially smarter. I would say that I have learned to understand what they're saying.
Okay.
And I have a better ability to translate science work into the language that normal people can understand, like plain speech. I talk to, like, as an officer, I have the opportunity a lot to be the liaison in between where the guys in the back are. I mean, they're not actually doing chemistry experiments
right.
with beakers and stuff, but because that'd be fun in a hurricane, right? But
don't drop that acid.
Yeah, exactly. But I have had the opportunity to learn how to communicate that. We do a lot of outreach. Great American Teaching is a big thing for us. The Aerospace Center of Excellence here in Lakeland. I know you talked to Gene recently,
Yep.
but like I speak for them periodically to all kinds of groups. What I've learned is how to translate the difficult things that I don't really understand into language that other people can actually figure out and kind of get behind. So while I couldn't do any of their jobs, I'm exposed to a whole lot more stuff that I'm like, oh, that's kind of cool. People walk up like, hey, is climate change real? I'm like, yeah, it is. I've seen it firsthand, and right. the data's there. I couldn't interpret that data for you, right? Like, I can't look at the printouts and the schematics and the graphs that the scientists produce, but I can translate what they're trying to say into plain language.
Well, there's military speak and there's everyday speak, and y'all speak in a lot of acronyms that I've never heard of.
We have our own special brand of military speak, as you put it.
That's in hours 48 to 52 after you finish your STEM 48 hours.
Right.
Hey, everybody, this is your host, Todd Dantzler, and I hope you're enjoying this episode. I would like to take a moment to do a shameless plug for my real estate business. As most of you know, I'm a partner with SVN Saunders Ralston Dantzler Real Estate, but I am also a working broker who is very active in listing and selling real estate. I've been in this business for over 41 years. I know, you're thinking he can't be, he's so young looking, but no, it's true. I've been actively listing and selling commercial real estate my entire working career on properties ranging from ag land to multifamily projects to office and commercial and industrial properties. I have held the distinguished CCIM designation since 1991. This is the highest designation you can achieve in the commercial real estate field. I believe that a big part of my success in the real estate business is because of the relationships that I have fostered throughout the state of Florida and also right here in Polk County. So if you have any real estate needs in buying or selling, please give me a call to see if I can help out. My direct line to my desk is 863-877-2846. Again, that's 863-877-2846. If you weren't doing this, what would you be doing in your life?
Oh, that's a great question. I'd like to think that I'd be retired, sitting on a boat fishing somewhere.
My God, how old are you?
42.
You can't retire at 42.
Actually, I can. I'm eligible. I've been wearing a uniform for 22 years.
Michael, aren't you 42? Yeah, you can't retire either.
So if I weren't doing this, I'll transition a little bit to the thought of like, what am I going to do after I'm done here? Because everybody assumes that as a pilot, I've got to track into Southwest Airlines or Delta, and I'm going to go do that. And the truth is that I'm not. That type of aviation just never interested me. I've always loved going on a mission, taking a crew, like connecting with folks, doing missions that I could really get behind in terms of what we were doing. And when I retire from wearing a uniform, I'm going to be ready to not be away from home as often. And so airline pilots, they're flying a lot of cool places. They're doing a lot of cool stuff, but
They're going a lot.
And while they're not working when they're not flying, they're still gone 2 weeks a month. Like that's still a lot of time away. And so I'm hopeful that when I'm done here, I will transit. Sorry, I'm tapping on stuff. I will transition to actually teaching leadership. Whether it's with a university or as a contractor consultant type. I've done some of that in my career to date, and that's kind of where my passion lies, like watching young people develop into the future generation of leadership. That's where I want to wind up when I'm done being leadership.
You live here in Lakeland. You moved here. Do you want to retire here when you're done with your career, do you think? Are you enjoying it that much, or is there, you want to get back to Idaho, or what's kind of in your...
So I can tell you we don't want to get back to Idaho.
Okay.
I love it up there, but I have a huge thing where I don't want to live somewhere that I have to deal with snow.
Yeah.
Like if I want to go play in the snow, I want to do it on vacation and not have to deal with it.
Yep. And leave it.
Yeah, exactly. I want to go see it, play in it, and come back to where it's warm. Yeah. We love it here in Lakeland. I was actually with the Aircraft Operations Center in a previous tour when we moved from MacDill Air Force Base to Lakeland Linder. I had a house in Tampa at the time. I loved it. I was in love with the Bay Area. I loved Tampa. I was like, I'm not going to move to Lakeland. That's weird. I'll just handle the drive, whatever, no big deal. And then this tour, like I had sold that house, moved on, and we came back and we bought a great place in the Highlands. We love it here. We've got great neighbors. I don't know if we'll be here forever, but we're not in a hurry to leave.
Good. When you decided to transition from the Navy to NOAA, what did your family think? Did they not understand? Were they asking questions like I did? Like, hey, how hard is it to fly through these hurricanes? What kind of stuff are you getting yourself into? Or were they, hey, you know what you're doing. You're a grown man. We trust what you're doing. As a parent, you never stop worrying about your kids.
I think it was somewhere in the middle.
Okay.
Because in my final couple of years with the Navy, I was doing work in places you can't talk about, doing missions you can't talk about.
Right.
And I really kind of withdrew conversations about my career with all of those folks because that was what I had to do. So a lot of them, I think, were just really excited that suddenly I could post on Facebook that I was in St. Croix flying into a storm, and it was cool, and here's a picture of the sunset and things like that. So there was a kind of a change in the worry. Like my poor mother, like I went from flying combat missions overseas. Now I'm flying into hurricanes. Like, why does my son have a death wish?
Yeah.
The way I put it,
Fly a Cessna.
Yeah. The way I put it, at least now, no people are trying to kill me.
Right.
Like I'm not in control of the weather, but I'm in control of the airplane, and the things I'm trying to deal with are not human factors on that front, and I'm doing it locally. Like,
yeah.
When I'm on the road, I stay in a hotel. I don't stay in a hooch at a military facility that's overseas and 14 time zones away or whatever it is.
We're kind of drawn to a close from the serious part. At the end of each podcast, I like to ask a lightning round of questions.
Sure.
And try and let people get a little sense of you. And so just kind of don't give them a whole lot of thought, but just want to, what's your favorite food?
Mexican food.
What's your favorite restaurant here locally?
Oh, shoot. That is a tough one because I like so many, and we're just now kind of starting to get a feel for what's going on. Oh, if I had to pick right off the top of my head, it would probably be the place I ate yesterday, which was, I think it's Harry's downtown.
Harry's old place.
Yeah.
Not Harry's old place in Winter. This is Harry's.
Hooked on Harry's.
Yeah.
Hooked on Harry's, the Cajun place. I had a really, really delicious piece of andouille crusted grouper, and I would have never thought to crust fish with sausage, but it was delicious.
Yeah, I like their sausage and grits. What's your favorite place that you've lived or that you've been stationed other than Lakeland? We'll take that out of the equation.
All right, that's fair. I have to go back to Hawaii. Some folks suffer from island fever out there. I never got that. It's gorgeous. I had fun out there. The flying was great, and the weather was never cold.
Well, especially coming from Idaho.
Yeah.
Do you like music? Are you a music fan?
I do. So it's funny. I'll give you a little sidebar story. Like my call sign is Shaka, like Shaka Kahn, and the call sign was given to me out of a sense of irony because I can't sing at all. I'm not there, and I am not an African American woman. So I've got like the hat trick of things that I'm not that make this call sign funny. And that's kind of the reason that the squadron voted to give it to me. But no, I like music of all sorts. I was actually trying to think about this morning when I was thinking about Shaka Khan. I was like, I couldn't tell you whether she is an R&B artist or where, like what niche she fits into, and I couldn't tell you that about a lot of things, but I like music across the board.
Country favorite band?
Country music tends to be.
So you're more of a country guy?
Yeah.
Who's your favorite artist or band?
Oh, shoot. I don't think I have a favorite, but like I grew up listening to George Strait and Garth Brooks in kind of that period of time.
Never heard of them. Do you like to dance? Do you have any rhythm in your body?
I would like to claim that I do, but as I have gotten older, that has kind of kicked off and life changes. But I've been known to two-step here and there.
All right. What's your favorite genre movie?
I am a huge,
other than Top Gun.
I am a huge self-proclaimed nerd. I love high fantasy. I love science fiction, and I like a good action movie. That's kind of where I go. Having a really hard. I know Oppenheimer was like the best movie of the year. You know, Oscar award, all that stuff. Having a really hard time getting through it.
What's your favorite movie then?
I mean, Top Gun is my favorite movie.
Other than that,
yeah. Oh shoot. I'd probably have to throw a nod to the Lord of the Rings trilogy that Peter Jackson did. Yeah, it's
that was a group of movies I couldn't get through. I tried getting my kids to look at it and say, "Oh man, this is just so hard for me to do." And mine was Blazing Saddles. Couldn't make it today.
Mel Brooks is fair, yeah,
but it is a movie that makes absolutely fun of everybody.
Mm-hmm.
And
Men in Tights was my favorite Mel Brooks.
Men in Tights, yeah. That was another good one. Do you like to cook?
I do.
What's your favorite thing to cook?
Oh shoot, I like to freestyle. I am not good with a recipe. Like somebody gives me, like I can't bake for anything.
So I was going to say you're not a baker then if you can't follow a recipe.
Oh, I can't bake for anything. So I like to twist it up a little bit. I made some shepherd's pie for St. Patty's Day is that last weekend? Yeah. And that's one of my go-tos. I love to put a good steak on the grill. Like I'm not afraid to twist up kind of anything in the kitchen, but I do like to cook.
If you could have any three people in the history of mankind over for dinner, who would they be?
So
live or dead? I mean, obviously you can't have a dead one, but it's all hypothetical.
I hope if the dead people show up, they show up when they're alive, because just the smell alone would be a problem. I think, first of all, it's important to note that the best dinner parties are people that can connect, right? So it doesn't matter who they are necessarily. You got to get people who have something in common, but are also comfortable enough with each other to have like real conversations.
Right.
I think it would be really entertaining if you could set the right ground rules for the conversation to bring in Jesus, Muhammad, and the Buddha, and just sit them around the table and like get them liquored up and try to figure out what happens. I think that would be really fun to watch. I also think it would be fun to bring in like presidents through the years. Like, let's sit down George Washington, let's sit down Lincoln, and let's sit down like Bush, like W. Bush, or one of the more current contemporaries. Be like, and just listen. Like again, get them liquored up and figure out where that conversation goes.
Would you cook for them, or would you take them out to dinner?
I'd probably cook.
It sounds like you'd want to cook them, have them around your dinner table, so you could feed them whatever you wanted and drink them with whatever you wanted, and let them literally loosen up without having Michael and his group come over and pester him or anything.
Yeah, fair. Yeah, I like to control the environment because it feels like I'm more comfortable in that space.
In your time in the Navy, I'm assuming you did some carrier landings?
I did not.
No carrier landings?
Nope. I've always flown. I mean, from the time I left the training command, which is the smaller aircraft,
Okay.
I've always flown big, heavy airplanes. So never landed on the boat.
We talked a little bit about how you decompress, and I was looking at your bio, and you talk about you enjoy woodworking projects, outdoor sports, and bear wrestling. Tell me about bear wrestling.
So that is a pun intended kind of moment. About a little over a year ago, my son was born, and his name is Bear Levi Kahn, and so we have leaned into all of the jokes, all of the teddy bears, like all of the bear stuff. It's literally BEAR. First question we always get is, how do you spell that? Or, rawr, like a bear. Anyway, so in my bio, I played that on purpose because people read it and they're like, what the hell is that? I really I'm an English major, right? So puns, plays on words are a natural thing for me. But all of my hobbies have gone out the window with being a dad, and I don't regret it for 1 second.
To me, that was always the greatest relief after a tough day coming home, and whether it's my son or my daughter, they grab you by the ears and they bite your nose or they give you a kiss. And it's like, I really don't have any problems today.
Yeah. And he just finished his first round of swimming lessons.
Good.
And so
how'd he do?
He did okay. He's kind of a natural in the water, but he's not comfortable because when you hand him to a stranger and she drops him in the pool, like it's not going to go well. So lately, my hobby has been coming home from work, changing clothes, and jumping in the pool with him to try to remind him that water is fun. So that's kind of where we're at.
So you've mentioned about being an English major 2 or 3 times. Who's your favorite author? Who's your favorite writer? What do you like to read?
So I'm an escapist by nature. Okay. When I go into a book, like real life is real life. I don't want to read about real life. So I go into, like, Tolkien is one that I couldn't get by without. Heinlein and Starship Troopers is probably my favorite book ever. And then I get into some really, I guess I don't want to call them trashy because I love them, but like current fiction, paperback stuff, any kind of cheesy off the shelf fiction or science fiction, fantasy stuff. I'm interested in.
None of them had Fabio on the front cover, did
No.
they? Okay.
I'm not into romance, but like if you walk it, when we used to have bookstores, like you walk into the bookstore and there's this whole aisle of like science fiction and fantasy, that's where I would go.
I'm not a great reader, but I do miss going into bookstores. Yeah, just go in, it's got an odor, a smell,
an energy,
a scent, an energy, and it's like, wow, look at all this stuff. Now you're looking on it on a 3-inch screen, a 12-inch screen. Mm-hmm. It's just not the same experience. It's not the way to get excited, whether you're flipping through a magazine or flipping through whatever books or genre you like. Is there anything that I ask you that you wish I hadn't, or is there anything that I did not ask you that, hey, man, you really should have asked me about this?
I don't think so. There's a lot of ground to cover.
Yeah.
And I think we did fine. And I certainly have no regrets.
Good. Well, that's always good to leave a podcast where they're not upset. But I do want to thank you. Thank you for your service, for your career, and all the men and women that work for you. After going through a number of hurricanes here as a civilian, also as a county commissioner, you do understand and appreciate the information that comes in, and the improved accuracy is incredible. I want to mention a website that if people want more information on your organization, it's omao.noaa.gov. And that talks a lot about what you do, talks about the aircraft, talks about careers, talks about a lot of things. That there's a lot of very interesting information on that. So
yeah, that's our it's fairly recently redone public facing website, and it's got some good information.
It's easy to navigate for a novice like myself. So it's omao.noaa.gov. So well, Captain Kahn, I want to thank you for coming in and taking the time. I want to thank you for what you told us, because I think you demystified some of the stuff. And I know we kind of centered on the hurricane stuff because, again, that's like the football program. Yeah. But there's so much other so many other things that your organization does and missions that you fly that could be another podcast. But thank you again. I wish you the greatest of luck and continued safety as we come up to the hurricane season. And folks, as you're getting information from your television, your radio, wherever, and it's coming in, a lot of that information is being generated by a team right here out of Lakeland. And be thankful that we've got folks like Captain Kahn and his team, top to bottom, that are providing us live action numbers so that we have the most accurate information. And pay attention to the fasten your seatbelt sign on the airplane, and pay attention to your emergency broadcasters when storms are approaching. So thank you very much, Captain.
Thank you. If I could leave you with one thing on that note, it would be that if we live in Florida and there are evacuation zones. If you live in an evacuation zone and they tell you to go, please go. Nothing makes us feel better when we do our work than hearing that the right people moved at the right times. Nothing makes us feel worse than thinking that we went out and did that and got that data, and then people ignored the information that we were able to provide. So if you get told you need to do something about it, please do so, because it makes us feel like we're actually doing work for a good reason.
Thank you. Appreciate it very much. Stay safe.
Yes, sir. Thanks.
Hey, everybody. I want to thank you for listening to Todd's podcast. This has been your host, Todd Dantzler. I want to encourage you to tune in next time. We'll have Paul Womble, the Director of Emergency Management Services for Polk County. And we strategically had Captain Kahn and Paul right here at the end of May and beginning of June to help get us prepared for hurricane season. So I think you'll really enjoy our next episode with Paul. As always, don't forget to rate, review, follow, and subscribe to Todd's podcast on your favorite podcast app. If you have any questions for me or any suggestions for future guests, please call or text our number at 863-288-0944 or visit todddantzler.com. Again, that's 863-288-0944, or visit my website, todddantzler.com. I look forward to hearing your questions and feedback, and please take care.